She has no idea we recorded everything. That was the exact sentence that came through the small speaker of my cell phone right before the line went completely dead. For a few very long seconds, I just sat there frozen, holding the phone tightly in my old hand. I honestly thought maybe the cell signal was just bad and the call had naturally dropped on its own. But then the harsh, ugly truth hit my brain like a heavy bag of bricks. My son had not ended the phone call. I was the one who had hung up the phone. My heavy thumb had slammed down on the red end call button purely out of a quick reflex. I had acted in total shock before my mind could even fully process the heavy weight of those chilling words. I was sitting inside my dusty pickup truck in the vast parking lot of a local hardware store on a freezing cold, cloudy Tuesday afternoon in late November. I had a plastic shopping bag full of cheap door and window seals resting on the passenger seat right next to me. The silence inside my truck was incredibly loud and heavy. It was the kind of deep, terrible silence that only comes around when something big breaks in your life. You know, deep down it can never, ever be put back together the same way again. My name is Gerald. I am 68 years old. For 31 long, hard-working years of my life, I worked as a structural engineer for the big city. My everyday job was to make sure huge office buildings and long, heavy bridges were strong enough to hold up under immense pressure without crashing down to the ground. I raised 2 lovely children with my wonderful wife Patricia in a cozy, warm house near the Green River Valley. I have lived a very long life, and I have seen many good and bad things happen in this world. I never once thought I was a foolish man or someone who could be easily tricked by a cheap, simple scam. But sitting there in that freezing cold truck, looking blindly out the windshield, I found out just how painfully wrong I really was. My dear, sweet wife Patricia passed away exactly 14 months before that horrible day in the parking lot. She had a terrible, painful cancer in her stomach. It was incredibly fast and brutal. From the awful day, the sad doctor told us the bad news to the quiet day, she took her very last breath. It was only 7 short weeks. 7 weeks is just long enough to say the few big things you really need to say to someone you love, but it is nowhere near enough time to finish a beautiful lifetime of deep, meaningful conversations. She was only 64 years old when she left me all alone. We had so many big, happy plans for our golden retirement years. We wanted to rent a giant motorhome and drive all the way up the long, winding highway to see the snowy mountains up north. We even kept a little handwritten checklist of places we wanted to see pinned to the front door of the kitchen fridge with a cheap magnet. After she was gone, the house felt way too big, dark, and empty, but I stubbornly stayed in it anyway. My good friends and nice neighbors kept telling me I should sell the big place. They said I should move into a smaller, easier apartment that would be much better for an old man to take care of all by himself. I always politely told them I was not quite ready to pack up and move just yet. What I really meant in my broken heart, but could not bring myself to say out loud to anyone, was that if I kept the glass windows closed on certain quiet days, the living room still smelled exactly just like her. I was simply not ready to pack up her sweet smell into cardboard boxes and let it blow away forever in the cold wind. My grown son Marcus called me on the phone every single Sunday morning, without fail. He was 39 years old and lived in a different, busy city a few hours away from me. He lived there with his younger wife Renata and their sweet 8-year-old daughter Sophie. Marcus had a very good, high-paying job managing big building projects for a rich construction company. He was a very confident, loud man. He walked and talked perfectly like a man who had never lost everything and had never been forced to start his life over from scratch. I was very proud of him and the comfortable life he built for his family. I used to tell Patricia how proud I was of him, even when she was too weak and sick in her hospital bed to smile and talk back to me. The weekly Sunday phone calls were entirely his own idea. They started right after his mother died. He told me he did not want me sitting all alone in that big dark house without anyone checking up on me to make sure I was eating my meals. I told him I was tough and I was not the kind of weak man to cry all day and fall apart in a rocking chair. He said he knew that very well, but he wanted to call me anyway just to be absolutely sure I was safe. I let him do it because I knew deep down the phone calls made him feel much better too. It was his own way of dealing with the sad grief of losing his mother, and I was not going to take that small comfort away from my boy. His wife, Renata, however, was a very different story entirely. I had known her for 11 long years. She was a very sharp, strict, and highly organized woman who liked to be in charge of everything. Whenever they came to our house to visit, she was always the one holding the tight schedule, telling everyone exactly when to eat, when to sleep, and when it was time to leave. Patricia once told me softly that Renata was a little cold inside her heart. She said Renata always calculated things in her busy head to see what benefit she could get out of any situation before she acted. I told Patricia that nobody is perfect and we should just love her, but Patricia said it was something we should always keep a close eye on. But little Sophie, my darling granddaughter, was absolutely nothing like her cold mother. Sophie was pure, bright sunshine. She was warm and sweet and never calculated a single bad thing in her entire life. She would run as fast as her little legs could carry her to give me a giant, tight hug the second they walked through my front door. She knew I used to build giant bridges for a living, so she always asked me to draw fun pictures of bridges for her and explain how they stayed up high in the air without falling down into the water. She was the main reason I survived those lonely, dark months after Patricia died. I loved that little girl more than anything. Around that same time in November, I had been thinking a lot about my legal will and my saved-up retirement money. It was not because I felt sick or thought I was going to die anytime soon. It was just the smart, practical thing to do for a man my age. My brain works just like an engineer. I like things to be neat, safe, and organized. Over the last 30 years, Patricia and I had worked with a very good, honest money helper named Clive. Clive helped us save our money carefully and build a very nice nest egg for our old age, so we would never be poor or hungry. We also fully owned our big house. There was no bank loan left to pay it all. I had a legal will written up nicely by a smart lawyer. The will clearly said that when I died, Marcus would be the main person to handle things, and he would get the house and most of the money. But it also strictly said a good chunk of money would be locked safely away in a trust fund for little Sophie, and she could only touch it when she turned 25 years old so she could pay for college or buy a nice house. It was a very clean and simple plan. Marcus knew he was getting the house and the money, but he did not know exactly how much money there was sitting in the bank. My own father once told me a powerful secret, that if you tell your kids exactly how rich you are, they stop seeing you as their loving dad and start seeing you as a walking bank account. I always remembered that hard lesson, so I kept the exact numbers a secret. So, that fateful Tuesday phone call started off completely normal. Marcus called and asked what I had for lunch that day and how my truck was running. Then he casually asked if I had looked at a colorful paper flyer he had mailed me. The flyer was about a money planning class in his city. He had been bothering me gently for 3 weeks about coming down to visit him and getting my paperwork sorted out. He kept saying it was time to get things organized since Mom was permanently gone. He loved to use the fancy word streamline. He said his wife Renata had a smart friend named Dr. Sylvia Crane who was a great expert at making wills and money matters easier for older folks. I told him I was doing fine on my own and I would think about it later when I had more time. Then we talked happily about Sophie playing ice hockey and he complained loudly about a lazy worker at his job. Then he said he had to go back to work. We said our warm goodbyes. But the call did not end there. The phone line stayed open. I heard a loud scraping sound, like a heavy wooden chair moving across their kitchen floor. Then I heard Renata's sharp voice very close to the phone microphone. She said she has no idea we recorded everything. Marcus muttered something back to her in a low, rushed whisper. I only caught a few words of his secret reply. He said something about the bank accounts and something about needing to act fast before I talked to Clive again. Then the call actually dropped and the screen went black. I sat in my freezing truck for a long time staring blindly at the steering wheel. The word recorded felt like a sharp, hot needle poking directly into my chest. What exactly had they recorded? I never talked about my exact money amounts on the phone. I was always incredibly careful with my words. And why did Renata say she had no idea? Who was this she they were talking about? I turned the key, started my truck, and drove home very slowly. I made a hot cup of tea and sat frozen at the kitchen table where Patricia and I used to eat our eggs and toast for 26 happy years. I thought long and hard about the word streamline. Then I thought about the word she. There were only 2 women this could possibly be about. One was my dead wife Patricia. The other was Patricia's older sister, my kind sister-in-law Eleanor. Eleanor is 71 years old and lives alone in a tiny house in the next town over. In my will, Patricia had specifically asked me to leave a small but helpful amount of money for Eleanor to make sure she was okay when she got older, because she did not have a husband to take care of her. Eleanor and I always liked each other a lot. She was a funny, tough lady who did not take any nonsense from anyone. I picked up the heavy phone the next morning and called Eleanor. She answered right away on the second ring and sounded perfectly normal. We talked about the boring weather and her garden for a bit. Then I took a very deep breath and asked her carefully if Marcus or Renata had called her lately. There was a very long, awkward silence on the phone. Finally, Eleanor sighed heavily and said Marcus called her 2 weeks ago. He asked her a bunch of nosy, weird questions about how much money I had saved up in the bank. Eleanor told him she had no clue at all. Then she said Marcus asked her if I was losing my mind. Eleanor's voice got very serious and quiet. She told me Marcus asked if my old memory was fading and if my daily judgment was getting bad. He even used the word capacity, which is a fancy legal word for being crazy and unable to make your own life decisions. Eleanor warned me strictly to be very careful. I thanked her from the bottom of my heart and hung up the phone. My old hands are shaking, not from fear, but from boiling hot anger. That night, I called my money guy, Clive. I asked him straight if anyone had tried to ask about my money lately. Clive got very quiet. Then he sadly admitted that a strange woman called his office 3 days ago claiming to be a money expert working legally for my family. She boldly tried to find out how my bank accounts were set up and exactly who would get the money when I died. Clive told her to get lost and firmly refused to give her any private details because she was not me. I told Clive to put a strict lock on everything and not to change a single penny unless I was sitting right there physically in front of him with my driver's license. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I sat at my wooden table in the dark and put the ugly pieces of the puzzle together. My own son and his greedy wife were trying to slowly build a fake case that I was an old, crazy man who could not handle his own money anymore. They were gathering secret recordings and asking sneaky questions to prove I was losing my mind. They wanted to take total control of everything before I died so they could have all the money right now. I knew right then I needed to trap them. The very next day, I went down to a small electronics store and bought a tiny black voice recorder that could fit perfectly right into my shirt pocket. It was the kind that could secretly record for 40 hours straight without the battery dying. Then I called my trusted lawyer, Janet, and made a secret appointment to see her. I told her what I suspected, and she told me exactly what to do. After talking to her, I called Marcus back on Sunday. I played the sad part of the lonely, tired, old dad perfectly. I told him I would love to come visit him and see his money expert, Dr. Crane. I told him I was finally ready to streamline my life. I could practically hear his greedy, massive smile shining through the phone. I packed my small suitcase and flew down to my son's busy city on a Friday night. Marcus picked me up promptly at the bright airport. He quickly carried my heavy bag and held the car door wide open for me like I was a fragile piece of old glass that might break at any second. He took me out to a very fancy, expensive steak dinner at a nice restaurant near his house. He was playing the perfect role of the perfect, caring son. It was the exact same fake, shiny face he put on when he was trying to win over a strict new boss at his construction job. It secretly made me sick to my stomach, but I kept a warm, fake smile glued to my old face the entire time. Renata was at the fancy restaurant too. She was acting overly sweet, pouring my cold water and asking nicely about my flight. It was a kind of kindness that felt very practiced, cold, and entirely forced. The only real and honest thing sitting at that entire table was little Sophie. She sat right beside me and completely ignored her expensive food. Instead, she talked a mile a minute excitedly about a fun school project she was building. She was making a huge model of a giant bridge out of wooden sticks and tight string. She looked up at me with her big, bright eyes and proudly said she picked a bridge project just because of me. My broken heart melted right there in the middle of the restaurant. After dinner, we went back to their house, and I patiently helped her figure out how to perfectly tie the strings so the bridge would not collapse under pressure. Later that dark night, I laid in the quiet guest bedroom in their big house. The house was very still, but I could hear Marcus and Renata whispering fiercely to each other through the thin bedroom walls. I could not hear the exact quiet word they were saying, but I knew exactly what they were doing. They were carefully planning the final trap for the next morning. I reached slowly into my shirt pocket, clicked the tiny button on my hidden black recorder, and placed it safely on the nightstand next to my bed so it could capture everything. I had already emailed my smart lawyer Janet all the written notes and solid proof I had gathered so far. Janet told me the strict law was totally on my side, and she told me exactly what to say to catch them red-handed. The next chilly morning, Marcus drove me to a very fancy office building on the expensive side of town. The building looked very rich and highly important, the kind of place that makes you feel small. We walked into an office that had big leather chairs and fake gold frames on the painted wall. A young receptionist offered us expensive bottled water and told us Dr. Sylvia Crane would gladly see us shortly. Dr. Crane was a sharp-looking woman around 50 years old. She wore an expensive dark suit and had a very calm, fake smile painted on her face. She shook my old hand firmly and said Marcus had told her so many wonderful things about me. That was my very first solid clue that this was a setup. This was clearly not a quick meeting to just say hello. They had been planning this fake meeting behind my back for weeks. She sat nicely behind her big wooden desk and started talking smoothly about how hard it is to get old and how smart families need to quickly optimize their money before it is too late. She purposely used big, confusing legal words to make it sound like she was doing me a giant favor by taking my problems away. She pulled out a thick stack of printed papers that were already filled out neatly with my full name and the correctly guessed value of my home. She did not know the exact dollar amounts in the bank because Clive had kept his mouth totally shut, but she was very, very close with her wild guesses. I played along perfectly with their sick game. I slumped my tired shoulders down to look weak, confused, and old. I asked silly questions. I sadly mentioned my dead wife Patricia a few times and let my voice crack like I was about to burst into tears. Dr. Crane smiled with hungry, greedy eyes. All the while, the little black recorder hiding safely in my shirt pocket was quietly capturing every single dirty lie they told me. Then, she slid a very specific, important document across the smooth desk for me to quickly sign. She handed me a shiny silver pen and tapped the paper. I slowly put on my reading glasses and read the thick paper line by line. It was not a simple, helpful paper to help me sort out my boring taxes. It was a massive, sweeping power of attorney document. If I signed that evil paper, I would legally hand over every single right I had as a free man directly to Marcus. He would instantly have total legal control over my house, my bank accounts, and my entire life. It was a cruel trap designed specifically to strip me of everything I owned while I was still breathing and walking around. I looked up slowly at Dr. Crane and then looked quietly at Marcus. I slowly pushed the paper back across the huge desk. I said I wanted to take the paper home and let my own lawyer read it first before I signed anything at all. The fake, warm smile vanished instantly from Dr. Crane's face for just 1 second before she forced it right back on. She nervously said that was completely fine, but her voice was very tight and angry. Marcus went totally pale and dead silent. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. He knew right then that I had slipped straight out of their trap. We left the fancy office and drove back to his house in awful, heavy silence. When I got back to the quiet guest room, I called my lawyer Janet and played the secret tape for her over the phone. Janet told me to bring the blank paper home safely in my bag. By the time I flew home on Sunday, Janet had furiously dug up the ugly truth. Dr. Sylvia Crane was not a real doctor at all. She was a known fraud who was not legally allowed to do this kind of money work in our entire province. She had a terrible history of tricking older people out of their hard-earned money. Marcus hugged me loosely at the airport when I finally left, but we both knew forever that something huge had broken between us. Before I walked away, Sophie ran up and hugged my legs tight. She whispered that she fixed the strings on her bridge and it was super strong now. I smiled and told her I was very proud of her. Over the next few busy months, my fierce lawyer Janet totally destroyed Dr. Crane's fake business. The government banned her from ever working with people's money again after Janet showed them the proof. The crooked notary who blindly stamped their fake papers was harshly punished by the law. Marcus was not officially arrested because he technically did not steal anything yet, but the strict law knew exactly what he tried to do. I marched straight into Janet's office and completely changed my entire legal will. I locked up my money so incredibly tight that nobody could legally touch a single penny without my lawyer and my trusted friend Eleanor both signing off on it. I made absolutely sure Eleanor was in charge of watching over things closely because she was the only one who warned me to be careful. I never angrily yelled at Marcus on the phone. I never directly confronted him about his evil plan. I just quietly built an unbreakable iron wall around my entire life so he could never try to knock it down again. He still calls me quietly on Sunday mornings. I answer the phone politely, but I listen very differently now. I carefully listen to the cold silence hiding behind his polite words. We talk about the weather and his job, but we never talk about the future. But little sweet Sophie still talks to me on the phone too. She proudly told me she definitely wants to be an engineer when she finally grows up. I gently told her the most important lesson an engineer must deeply learn is that a big building might look very beautiful and incredibly strong on the outside, but you always have to check the hidden beams deep on the inside to see if it is truly solid where it actually matters. She smiled through the phone and said she would definitely remember that forever. Patricia would have caught the greedy lies much sooner than I did. She was always way better at reading people's dark hearts than I was. But I caught it in the end. And sometimes, catching the bad lie late is still perfectly fine, just as long as you carefully catch it before you foolishly sign your own name on the dotted line, and right before the phone line goes completely, silently dead. I am just glad I built a wall strong enough to protect what my wife and I spent our whole entire lives building together. Hit that subscribe button for more stories like this and turn on the notification bell. See you in the next one. Peace out.